Hey everyone, Kevin here with Victory 4x4, and in this video I'm going to walk you through how to install our skid system on your 3rd gen 4Runner. Now to get started, if your 4Runner is still equipped with the factory skids and splash guards, you're obviously going to need to get those removed, and then we'll get this installed. We'll begin by installing this rear mounting bracket for the front skid plate. It's going to go in place just like this, with this row of mounting holes toward the rear. It bolts to this cross member just underneath the steering rack. To get this installed, you'll start in these front outside set of holes using 6mm flange head bolts. Go ahead and run each of these in by hand. Once you have those up snug, you're going to want to push this bracket all the way forward in its slots, and then you'll come to this next slot back. You'll need to center punch and then drill using this bracket as a guide to 5/16 to clear a 6mm bolt that you'll then install a nut and washer on the back side. After you have each of those drilled out, grab 2 more 8mm flange head bolts and then install the washers and nuts on the back side. Once you get all 4 of those started, just leave everything a little bit loose for now so that you can adjust this to fit the skid when it goes in. After that, you can come up here to this front cross member just in front of your radiator, and you're just going to drop your 3/8 bolt with a washer installed down through the top into each of these larger holes. And then you can loosely install a serrated flange nut on the bottom of each of these bolts. Now to begin installing the front skid, you're going to use these 2 slots and simply slide those over the nuts on these 2 bolts that we just installed. Once you have it hooked on those 2 bolts, you'll come back here where this meets that mounting bracket we first installed, and you can put in one of the 1/2" button head bolts with a serrated flange nut. Now if you're only going to be installing the engine skid, you can tighten all this hardware up at this time. Just note on these front bolts, you may need to apply some downward pressure to the skid so that those serrated nuts can bite in as you tighten the bolt head from the top side. Now if you're going to be installing the mid skid as well as the transfer case skid, you'll want to leave all this hardware loose for now until we get those installed. Next, you can begin installing this mid transmission skid. It's going to have a cutout in the front edge that meets right around the back edge of this front skid, and you'll install that along the front using 4 more 1/2" button head bolts. Then on the rear of this skid, through each of these mounting holes, you'll install one of your 7/16 carriage bolts up through the factory hole in this cross member, and then install a washer as well as serrated nut. Then, just like before, if that's the last skid you're going to be installing, you can go back and tighten up all your hardware now. However, if you're going to be installing this transfer case skid, leave that loose until we get this installed. Now before we can actually put the skid in place, you're going to need to install the rear mounting cross member. For this, it's simply going to slide in place between the frame rails and then bolt from the outside in through a factory hole. For that, you're going to use this long 1/2" bolt with a washer, and then you can back that up on the inside with another washer and a serrated nut. Then you'll do the same thing over on the other side. Now with the main mounting bolts in this cross member, we'll just leave it loose for now until we get the skid installed, because that'll locate its position front to rear. Then back up here, you're going to have one mounting hole on each side of this skid that needs to be drilled out. For those, you're going to open it up to accommodate a 7/16 carriage bolt, and you're going to need to drill all the way out the top side of this mount. Then, like we mentioned, you can mount the front of this skid with those 7/16 carriage bolts. Again, the front of this one is going to have the notch cutouts to fit around the skid in front of it. And those two should mate nicely together. Then with it hanging loose on that front hardware, you can come back here and bolt it in to the cross member you installed earlier. For that, you're just using more 1/2-inch button head bolts with serrated flange nuts. Then after you have all that skid hardware installed, you'll need to push up on the back of this transfer case skid, forcing this rear cross member up tight to the frame. And then you can drill using these two holes as a guide on each side to 5/16 to accept the 3/8 self-tapping bolts we provide. As with any hole you drill, it's always a good idea to center punch beforehand and then start with a small pilot bit before opening up to your final size. After you have all 4 of these holes drilled, go ahead and install the self-threading 3/8 bolts provided in your bolt bag. With those self-tappers in, you can go back and tighten up all your skid mounting hardware. Next, you can install your front access panel using 5/16 button head hardware. Then you can tighten that access panel in place with a 3/16 hex. And that'll be it for this skid install. So if you guys have any questions about these skids or any other product here at Victory 4x4, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can give us a call, 269-459-8447, or email us, info@victory4x4.com.